Nici caz n-am.
Suntem live.
Ups! Avem caz. Să zicem adevărul, că suntem adevăr. Cred că pare că toată lumea poate să petreacă, în loc să petreacă cele 10 secunde să-și întreacă scriptul să gândească cu ce începe. Sper că s-a ajuns.
Hello to the fourth round of ARGO Open. Thank both teams for being here. Now, in the government, we have Romy, I think.
Yeah.
Speaking first. Second? Speaking third? And reply? And in team opposition we have?
No idea for now.
Yeah, for now. Speaking first?
Andrei?
Second?
Andrea? Andrea Moldovan.
Andrea M.
Andrea M.
Speaking. Hoya.
You can just say Andrea H.
And
Andrea Moldovan.
Andrea.
Bine că am să zic că nu am discrepat.
Okay. We are debating on the motion.
This House would not award major sporting events to countries which have a significant portion of their population living below the poverty line.
Okay. Thank you. So, without further ado, if there aren't any more questions, we invite Theodora to start the government stage.
Just a sec.
Hosting a sport event can be something very honorable for some specific countries. But in my speech, I'm going to prove to you, for those countries that have a major of their population living below poverty line, it is a burden and not something that they should be proud about. What I'm going to do in my speech are three things. First of all, I'm going to define the terms and the context of this debate. Second of all, I'm going to explain the metric in which we have to judge this debate. And lastly, I'm going to go into my own constructive, in which, first of all, I'm going to explain to you why hosting sporting events that directly hurts the population of the specific country, and second of all, why it is immoral for sports federation to award sporting events to those poor countries. And my second speaker is going to explain why doing that is the problems that those countries actually have. But before that, the definitions. We define these that have the power of events to we define countries that have been living below poverty line, portion of the population can't afford basic healthcare, can't afford educations, and most of them are unemployed. We see that those countries are countries like China, are countries like South Africa, and like Brazil, all countries that have hosted major sporting events in the past. Now, no thing. What is the metric in which we have to judge this debate? We believe that we generally stop a country from hosting the sport events in the moment when, first of all, when the federation have to send a message to the population, because we believe that sports are hardly politicized by today, and second of all, in order to protect the population of that specific countries and the persons that can compete in that competition. So we believe that at the end of the day, we can prove to you that the federations have a duty, first of all, to protect the population of that countries, and second of all, to send a message, a political message. We win this debate. Now, going on to my first argument. Before that, yes, sir.
Do you realize the fact that countries, as you stated, China, South Africa, states with money, who would be able to solve some problems with poverty, but don't do it? Don't you think we need another solution in order to solve that problem?
The reason why they don't do it is because they invest that money that they have into sporting events. They waste a lot of money that they could otherwise use into solving, no thank you, their systematic problems. Now, going into my first argument about how hosting sport events directly hurts the population of the countries in which the citizens live below poverty line. First of all, we want to clarify that the citizens of that country already have a very hard time, because they cannot afford basic healthcare, they cannot afford education, they don't even have money to afford food in some instances. So we believe that they already have a very, no thank you, hard time. So let's see what happens after those countries host those kinds of events, because three things happen. First of all, misallocation of the funds, and here I'm tackling more the POI that the team of opposition told us. We are saying that it's a huge misallocation of funds, because in order to host those events, you have to invest a great amount of money into constructing stadiums, roads, no thank you, and things like that. So we believe that those money could be used a lot more in like the benefit of the population rather than just hosting, no thank you, a temporary event. So we believe that there are a lot of alternatives for the governments to actually improve their infrastructure, to actually improve their systematic problems. But what they choose to do with the money that they have is invest them in those no thank you sporting events that are only hurting the population. Second point in this argument.
Before that,
We believe, no thank you, that hosting those sporting events creates artificial workplaces for the people and with very, very poor work conditions. And why are we saying that? Because we believe that in order for the governments to create stadiums in a cheap way, they have to underpay their workers. Because no thank you, those countries are poor. Because those countries don't care about their population, and those countries choose to underpay their workers in order to build cheap stadiums. And let's see what happens, because we see that in South Africa, when they were building the stadiums for the World's Rugby Cup, we see that what happened was that 9 workers were dying every day, no thank you, when building that stadium. So we see that this is what happens to the citizens of the countries, this is what happens to the workers, because the governments, when they choose to host those events, they no longer care about their population, they care about worldwide popularity that is killing their citizens. Now, the last point, no thank you, the last point in this argument. How we have to, in order to build those stadiums, we have to evacuate people from neighborhoods and relocate them in asylums and things like that. Because we believe that we need space in order to create stadiums. We need space to create stadiums, to create roads, we need workers. We believe that what happened in Brazil is that they had to relocate millions of people out of their event. Yes, ma'am.
Are you aware of the fact that these major sporting events are financially supported by lots of countries, not only by the hosting country?
Yeah, fine, they're supporting by other countries as well, but that doesn't mean that the country that is hosting them has to pay the most amount of money. We believe that this is a reality and we need to engage with that. Second argument, that it is immoral for sporting federations to award sporting events to poor countries. We believe that in today's society, sports are not only about competing and are not only about sports in general. We believe that they are highly politicized. And why do we say that? Because we see that we politicize sports in all sorts of instances. For example, when we sanctioned South Africa from going to the Olympics because they were not, because they didn't have any black people on their team. But more than that, we see that we sanctioned Saudi Arabia because of the violation of the human rights. So we see that those are all instances in which we've used sports in a politic way. So we believe that what sports federations have to do today is do the same thing. They have a political duty to say stop to the human rights abuses that I explained to you that happen in those countries, because they have a duty to show that the lives of the individuals of that countries are more important than just simply entertainment. So what have I proved to you at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker? First of all, I proved to you that we are directly hurting the population of that country by awarding those events to those countries. Because first of all, we misallocate funds for those people. Second of all, we believe that we are directly hurting them when we put them to work on those working sites. And lastly, because they have to be relocated from their neighborhoods. And lastly, because it's the duty of the Federation Sports to do that. I've never been more proud to propose.
And now we give the floor to Andrei to commence the opposition's case.
Mr. and Madam Speaker, the problem with the government today is the fact that they do not understand what they actually need to prove. What we need to prove is the fact that through organizing this kind of events, we're going to bring economical benefit to that poverty, to poor people who live in poverty. We do not say that we're going to solve poverty in that country. We do not say we're going to make that country be benefit for a lot of people in the country. Well, let's prove to us the vision is going to which they on some kind of issue, which the first one, the lack of morality into our first argument, and second, and the effect of media inside the country is the funds. One, there is alternative. That's what they presented to us. They said there's a lot of alternatives that we could do, that we could use this money for. They didn't give us any kind of alternative that we could use. But we don't even care because we don't need alternatives. Because the problem is that the examples that they gave to us, and they didn't answer to my QA actually with this, is the fact that countries as China, countries as South Africa, countries would be able to vote, but they don't. The government is not, because they don't have. If we stay, nothing is going to, they don't have anything to, is going to happen until they're actually ready to accept it. And I'll explain it from why is that. The second one, cheap stadiums. No, that is not true. When we talk about an international event, such as the Olympic Games, such as the European League, such as an international competition of football, you are not allowed to construct cheap stadiums. You are allowed to construct stadiums which are according to the measurements of the countries and of the sporting federation. You don't construct. The second thing that is still have a salary sheet. The third thing, the people. We do not consider exactly how it happens. We do not think it actually happens, but even if it happens, my colleague will present through her argument how this actually is going to evolve and actually this is going to help people who are poverty, and she will explain more about this through her argument. But before
Of how governments work and harder.
Isabel was the way that job. They consider the infrastructure with the people from their country as a good thing. And I'll present more of this through my argument. So the second point of rebuttal, lack of morality. Why is it a lack of morality for the federation to organize a competition in a is an Olympic? Because they do not consider very well morality. This is the lack that want to participate in order, even in a country federation decides that happens nowadays majorly build the infrastructure of our team. Two terms. The country going to benefit the fact that we're organizing, the fact that we're going to many stadiums, you need infrastructure, you need to consider that it's a very good reason for people to actually have money. They do not have any kind of job. The reason for which they die on the streets because they're hungry is because they can't find a job. That is the problem. Is they're not having any job and just staying there. That we will have come to the country. Does that mean our country to all those very things that we had new shops only because we organized this event? And secondly, and very important, the long term. What is happening on the long term is the fact that what that means is the fact that people in Romania invested. You need investors. Nobody knows about the beauty organizer because we can organize a very well competition, which means we can attract new tourists and new investors. And because team government did not prove in any point how it would be better, worse for the economy, and proven to people which.
Now, to continue the government case, we give. Hold on.
What they fail to understand in this debate up until this point is that they're not proposing anything. They're not changing the status quo by allowing these countries to do something. However, the actual change from the status quo is what we are proposing. As such, what they have to support right now is the fact that these countries have a significant amount of their population below poverty line, with all their benefits included. These countries have still people starving and people not being able to access education and health just as much as they had 50 years ago, even taking into consideration all their benefits, which I'm going to prove are not even there. So, several rebuttal points, reconstruction, and then my constructive. Firstly, what we heard from team opposition is this whole idea of how we create jobs, and a bad job is better than no job. Well, Mr. Speaker, several answers to this. Firstly, we are saying that A, these jobs are not something sustainable on the long term for these people, since the jobs are only going to be available in the period in which these Olympic Games are A, going to happen, or before they're going to happen. When we are speaking about jobs, like building a stadium or building a store by the stadium to sell hot dogs to the players. But even disregarding sustainability, we are which has been exploited is A, extreme customs the population with a standard. You don't think you're going to be there for lower than $2 a day for a person who works for 8 hours carrying bricks to build a stadium is not something that we would rather give to population. Second point of rebuttal. This whole idea that people come into the country, they spend major the whole people for the last week in quickly, but speaking as horrible as today, come and spend taking months before that of corrupt governments. Actually, something, yes, that government are trying to tell us how going to read this coming from the company. Last idea, what we heard is that, well, to answer that an investor infrastructure, so they don't have access to education in that country, they're not not what these countries are doing. And secondly, they're breaking the binding contract of vote by allowing themselves to be elected by citizens to help their needs. And instead of doing that, no thank you, sir, they're building stadiums and further exploiting the population. Second point. But before my second point, sure.
So you would rather keep the status quo in which the state and the government does absolutely nothing about the poverty. We said we're not solving the poverty, we just doesn't do it in the
right now, about a minute, there is some kind of how the support are very, very big is going to be. They're to be happy in their country. And the problem with that is that it is not any better. It's just like a very funny thing that happens for 2 weeks in your country to make it look good, and then you're going to go back to your rural, horrible house and be poor for the rest of your life. So their whole benefits are not even there. Even if for 2 weeks it might sound good, but it's not. The 5 months of work before that do compensate. But now, how does the population feel? And we're saying that we're going to experience political apathy because the government is actually disappointing its population. We're going to experience lack of cooperation from the people because the government sends the message that the international image, firstly, brings no palpable benefit to the population, and secondly, that their lives, their well-being matter less than the well-being of the image. And my last point, how is it going to change? Because we're saying that we're going to, by applying our motion, we're going to apply pressure to these whole governments. We're going to apply pressure because A, the upper class of these countries, because these countries are characterized by inequality, the upper rich class, which has power, decisional power in the government, are going to be incentivized to apply this power into making the governments change something so they can further. We're saying that because they to actions, and we're saying that firstly, since we're not helping the population in a sustainable way. Secondly, because we're making it worse for these people. And lastly, because we do not even respect the basic motto of sports, which is about integrity. This motion should definitely pass.
Thank you, Alexander. To
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, sports are something that are bound to people, right? Sports are something that are gathering that media further develop this in job users from countries will, I think, wrong that they will be used cheaper. There are more money than nothing, and nothing is what those people have right now. Even if they turn out to be abusive, the thing is that we should not forget the fact that they are in a spotlight of the media, and media will put pressure on that coverage to intervene. Okay, more on that. They are telling us that they are not sustainable on the long term. Well, one, my colleague has explained to you how some of them are sustainable on the long term if we are creating new shops and a new stadium that someone has to take care of. But even if not all of them are sustainable on the long term, what is wrong with having some for right now on the short term that is nothing, it's more than nothing. No? Now about and all are being corrupted, right? One, the money isn't going directly to the state, it's in a cash flow on the market because tourists pay money to the shops, to the bars, to the restaurants that they go in. That money doesn't go back to the state, it stays in the cash flow. And even if some money goes back to the states from taxes, we believe that those kind of taxes will be further reallocated in a place to work. To explain before my third.
Exploited workers heard on a comparative to how many compliments have you heard about how great stadium Saudi Arabia has, since we're speaking about media coverage?
Exactly about media coverage. When Saudi Arabia was blamed because workers were abused, Saudi Arabia was put in a blaming position. This is what we want to have. We want to have that country that abuses people to be put in put it in a spotlight in which it's going to be pressured not to do that anymore. And we believe that if actually this is even an incentive that country would not actually tend to abuse those people because they know that this will gain the media coverage. One my third point of rebuttal, let's talk about investors and tourists. And we believe that they have ignored this point because this is the long-term impact that we have to look upon. In the moment in which, one, we are talking about investors, we are talking about countries that have not gained attention in the past. A major sport event gains lots of attention, and that further on can bring a spotlight on whether that country is a country in which investors could come in or not. And we believe that they will rather come in the moment in which they see that the market has so far expanded. But more of that, tourists will further come into that country, not only on the short term, because they are going to discover that country, and that country is going to remain in the history as, I don't know, Brazil, the country that organized the Olympic Games from 2016. No thing. And this is the long-term effect, but more than that, the states do. We believe that when the state isn't actually doing something good, it should be putting pressure on, and people would not be angry because the state will organize the Olympic Games. People would rather be happy that they will have newer jobs, that they will have a place to work. People would rather be happy that they are getting media coverage. And we believe that it's in the morality of the international community to give him this. Okay, but let's start before that. But before that, sure.
Now, Brazil is holding the Olympic Games and the World Cup of very, very long of that country.
Well, we have to change a better way. Thank you. Okay, we're talking about the strong handling the government, and we are talking about the fact that media pressure will bring more voice to the population, and it will help further help that country. In Brazil, of starving, and how media covered the story and told, look, Brazil is organizing nothing. Brazil is organizing the Olympic Games, but people are starving on the streets. Let's do something about this. And we have an impact on two points. First, the international community, and second, the people in that country. The international community we aren't sure that the international community has understood until that point that those people were in such a bad position. Because media coverage wasn't that big, because they haven't gained up until that moment some of BBC and CNN and so on and so forth every day, because they were hosting a major sporting event. And we believe that in that moment, we would rather have an international community that would start and put pressure on Brazil, for example. Because in Brazil, we have less abuses because of the fact that we look upon Brazil right now and we blame them. And you know why we blame them? Because we know what's happening out there. And how can we know what's happening out there? Only with media coverage, you know, thing. Media coverage comes along with these sporting events that are bounding people and that are getting lots of it. Now, no, those people in that might not have had an option up until that point to be this vocal. And this voice, this strong voice, comes along with media coverage. The fact that they can give interviews, the fact that they acknowledge the fact that they are in a bad situation. It will rather make them try and fight for their rights and fight for their government to be in a better situation and treat them better, because those governments have the money to do so, but they are simply corrupt. In the moment in which they are gaining media coverage, we believe that, one, the international community will intervene, and two, the population will become more vocal. And at the end of the day, what we see that we have proved is that, yes, these sporting events aren't bringing any harm, because if there are jobs, and there are more jobs that are at the moment and in those countries, and that is better than nothing. But more of that, there won't be abuses because of the media coverage, and we will further take care of that country on the international community. For all these reasons, please.
last constructive speech of team government. We invite Miles.
Olympics have never been and will never be about solving poverty. This is the reality, and this is the kind of reality that they actually choose not to engage with. At the end of the day, you're never ever going to solve the real world just as before answering the two main questions of this debate, I'm going to look at their main contradiction in this case. Because what they stood for two constructive speeches, firstly, it was this whole idea about how you gain positive light for these countries, how you actually have positive publicity, and how you make investors come into your country and invest because they see how amazing your country is. But then again, they tell us that, well, no, we actually think that this is bad publicity that puts pressure on the government. So at the end of the day, we actually want to see with what kind of authority they stand for, because they cannot argue for both a debate. First, and secondly comes to the federation. But before that, let's start with the first one. When do the poor people actually live better? Because the first big idea was that, well, they told us that it is efficient because we create infrastructure. Well, what we tell you, and let's clarify this once and for all, that even if you have roads, even if you have some sort of infrastructure, in a country which has 5 hospitals in total, that doesn't make a difference at the end of the day. Because the problem that those people have is that they do not have basic needs. They do not have health care, they do not have clothes, they do not have food. They do not care about roads, they do not care about having a McDonald's in front of their stadium. They care about basic needs, they have necessities, and those are the kind of things that the government must invest in. That their taxes and their money should go into making sure that they actually have ensured their basic needs. But what's more is that we are saying that even if this was true, no, thank you, sir. If having roads means having tens of people dying every day because you have to build those roads, then we do not want those roads. We do not want roads built when you have 10 people dying every day because of them. We do not want people to get abused just because we like the idea of infrastructure. We think that this is absurd. So what we are saying is that the taxes from money would actually have to go into welfare and into things that these people can actually feel, no thank you, sir. Now, the second idea about investors. No, thank you, ma'am. They told us that investors don't come because they don't realize how nice a country it is. Mr. Speaker, investors don't come in Romania because we do not have industries, because we do not have the capacity to sustain a lot of industries, not because they do not know that our country is beautiful. This is the reality. Investors won't go in Brazil because they realize how nice Brazil is. They won't go into countries just because they see that at the Olympics there were nice people. This is not how business works. We are saying that you should have to engage with reality. No, thank you, sir. But then again, no, thank you. They told us how, well, cheaper jobs are fine because they exist. No, cheaper jobs are not fine because they exist. You have to make sure that when you provide jobs, A, you provide them on the long term. You make sure that this is sustainable. That you do not have jobs only for 2 months just then to tell people, well, you do not have a job anymore because the Olympics have ended. But secondly, what we are telling you is that even if they come with a rhetoric about media, even if they tell us that, well, media is going to put pressure, what we tell you is that reality looks quite different. Why? Because what media does, even if it puts pressure, even if it shows the harsh realities that exist in Brazil, nothing changes. We have seen how Brazil has hosted Olympics and the World Cups for so many years, and the poverty in Brazil remains the same. People have the same horrible lives for so many years. We can see nothing has actually changed. Before moving on, I'll take your QR.
The reason for which media is so important is because we have huge organizations and charity campaigns that go into that country and help that country with the people who are in poverty. This is why we want the media to know the problems of the country.
Mr. Speaker, this is not comparative. Why? Because media portrays these things even if you have Olympic Games, even if you don't. Media still portrays poverty in Brazil even if you have the Olympics hosted there. So we are saying that charities and NGOs are still going there because NGOs care about the situation regardless of you hosting the Olympic Games or not. So we think that this point does not stand. But then again, they tell us that we boost the economy, we create shops, we create things for people to actually go to. What we are saying to this is that no, you're not doing this. This is not sustainable. Why? Because as they conceded, these governments are corrupt. These governments won't care. These governments won't make sure that once you have some sort of jobs, some sort of places where you can send your people to, they won't abuse their population anymore. Because no, they're still going to want to make profit. They're still going to want to abuse their population. We think that this point does not stand. Now, the last point. What we are saying is that, well, they told us that we bring this country in the spotlight and this is a very good thing. What we are saying is that, again, media coverage. Media coverage doesn't change a thing, as I have already said. But you can take an example that is actually true. We have so many sweatshops, for example, in countries like Indonesia, in countries like China, and we have coverage for them. People know that sweatshops exist. People know that a lot of people get abused every day. People know that people work for $1 per week. What we are telling you is that nothing changes even if you have media coverage. Nothing changes. You do not put pressure. But the real pressure that exists out there, Mr. Speaker, is the pressure that comes when you sanction those countries. Is the pressure that comes when you tell those countries that you cannot host the Olympic Games, and the Olympic Games are so important to you. Your population cares a lot about football. Your population wants to see those Olympic Games hosted in that country because that is one of their values. That is something that comes with their tradition. But what you are doing is that this is how you put pressure. Because the people that are going to pressure the government in those situations are the wealthy people who actually want those Olympic Games to be hosted in Brazil. And they will pressure the government because they have something to gain from hosting the Olympic Games in those countries. No, thank you, sir. Now the last point, which is going to be quite succinct. What is the most immoral thing to happen when it comes to the federation? They tell us that these countries should have the right to do so. Mr. Speaker, this is not how rights work. Why? A right comes in order to protect you. This is why we have rights. We have rights because we want to protect ourselves from something, because we want to be in a good circumstance. What they are saying is a nice concept. Olympic Games are nice, then we should have the right to host them. No. When Olympic Games abuse your population, when Olympic Games actually make the economic state of your country even worse, then no, you do not have the right to host Olympic Games. But what's more is that the moral thing to do for Western countries that exist within the Federation is to host the Olympic Games for themselves because they have the money to do so. Because they are the reason for which countries like South Africa, Brazil, and Qatar are with 50 years behind with their economy. They do not have states which can work for themselves because of colonialism and so on and so forth. This is my second speaker already explained. So what we are saying at the end of the day is that if you actually want people to be happy, if you actually want to do the moral thing, the main thing to do is not harass these people, is not make them live in a world in which they will continuously be abused.
Now we invite Koya to hold the last constructive speech of the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's motion is not about sporting, it's not about sports principles, it's not about any of these things. What we're talking about today is simply the opportunities that these kinds of events bring. And what we have to engage in today's debate is the comparative. Does this make the situation worse? And we think that this is the burden that team proposition had to bring us today. That they had to prove to us that this is indeed something that what we had to prove, they don't make it worse. And we don't have to prove at all that solve the unemployment problem or the poverty problem. All we have to do is show you that there are benefits to be found in organizing such events if there is not some detrimental action that's going on there. Now, no thank you in my speech about economy, image, and how to talk about media, and how through organizing such things, simply denying them the opportunity of organizing such things. But before all of that, let me clarify some things. First of all, that contradiction that we have, that we are going to put them in the spotlight as being bad countries, and and at the same time, the investors are going to see it as an opportunity. No, it's not a contradiction, because we are showing that socially, that country is bankrupt, and that we have a problem of human rights and things like this that we need to solve. What the investors see are opportunities, because they capitalize on the image that you're forming. No, thank you. We are simply by bringing that country into the spotlight, it gets an image, and that image can be exploited touristically. And that's what I'm going to talk about in my second clash. But before that, this whole idea that the problem is not of bringing McDonald's and roads and all that when you have only 5 hospitals in your country. Well, I'm sorry to say, but this is today's debate. This is the comparative that we have to make, and this is the reality check. You are going to have 5 hospitals in that country, even if you don't organize the Olympic Games. This is something that they've never engaged with, and we've tried making them engage with this by showing them that, look, by not organizing these Olympics, you're not going to solve anything. The government is still going to invest in whatever they like. They're still going to be corrupt. They're still going to do all of these things. Now, let's jump into the constructive. Let's talk about exploitation. First of all, we think that for these people, it's some sort of a given, and we have to acknowledge all of this. Yes, it's preposterous that people live in these conditions, but the thing that we have to ask ourselves is if we can change any of this through what we're doing. And we think that no, by simply denying these countries the opportunity of organizing such events, you're not going to bring them out of exploitation. You're not going to make their situation in any way better by doing all of this. Now, the next thing is that this measure actually changes nothing. If these people are going to be exploited by the state, then the state is simply going to be free to do so as it did before now. How exactly, in a second, Theodora, how exactly is this actually going to change anything for the situation of the people in the moment in which you actually take away most of the pressure that you can put on them? But I'll expand on this in my third class.
We explained to you that the pressure that governments feel is from the upper class. And the upper class feels pressure in the moment when we sanction those countries from the sport point of view, when you don't allow them to host.
I'm sorry, I have no idea what higher class you're talking about. The higher class in those countries, the people that have money, the people that are rich in those countries, I don't recall ever having told us how exactly those people are going to interact with all of this. I'm sorry, I don't know what to say to this. Now, moving on. This whole idea about cheaper jobs aren't better than nothing. Why? Why exactly aren't cheaper jobs better than nothing? I mean, seriously, these are people who have lived under the poverty line. We think that an opportunity for them to work for 4 months and gain a better salary than what they have up until now is a good thing for them in the situation in which they don't have better alternatives than all this. Okay, they are going to be only short-term. They are not going to be sustainable. So what? They still have more money to spend for themselves. If 4 months for them is a period in which they can live better, we have absolutely nothing against this. And so we see, okay, what's the big problem with exploitation and with these whole bad standards that we have? Bad standards? The bad standards are embedded in that society, in that corruption of the culture. If the people aren't going to step up to this, then how exactly is an outside measure going to change any of that? Moving on, let's talk about economy and the benefits of image. No, thank you. I already told you how we think that short-term jobs are in fact a good thing. They are an opportunity for these people to gain some money that they can better spend themselves, invest into, I don't know, better shelter, better food for that period, medical care, any of this. Now, this whole idea of cash flow, the problem is that these Olympic events, that these sporting events bring lots of tourists into the country. Yes, of course, it's going to be only short-term. The tourists are going to come and spend money in that country. But the thing is that the money is going to stay there and it enters the cash flow. What happens when the money enters the cash flow is that not the state is not going to do anything about the cash flow, but the private companies, they are the ones that can expand in such situations. They have more capital to invest and create more jobs for the people. So we feel that actually, yeah, we do make a change by allowing them to expand. Moving on, image. We think that the way that image works is that in the moment in which you have Brazil organizing such sporting events, all the tourist videos or things that the country uses in order to promote itself are going to be more visible, because it's the country that organizes the Olympic events. Sure, it's not going to be the thing that brings the investors there, but it's the thing that rather makes people more aware of what's going on in that country. If you show images of the beautiful beaches that Brazil has, or the beautiful sites that China has, these are the things that are rather going to bring tourists into the country. And that's what makes investors realize that, look, we can invest in tourism in that country. We think that any sort of investment that this can bring is a good investment. As long as it brings money to the country and it brings more tourists and investors, it's a good thing. No, thank you. Talking now, let's just move on and talk about the greatest thing of this debate, media. No, thank you. About media and protests. We think that what this actually does is the capacity to become more viewed by the people. The fact that you are going to organize these events and are going to have policemen and firemen and all of these protesting and saying, look, we cannot offer you the things that you need because we are underpaid, because we are exploited, because of all of these things. These are the things that the media is going to pick up on. The media can only pick up on this whole idea that they've been denied the Olympics for so long. But the fact that you have all that capital image that you can use, all the rhetoric that you can invest into this is something great. The UN can use such images in its conferences, in its diplomatic engagements, in order to put pressure on these states. You cannot do all of these things when all that you know is that these countries have a problem with abuses and with underemployment and with all of that. No, these are visual things that you can invest in. And these are the things that can convince charities to come up into this country and to work for bettering the people. Because it pays a lot to be out there, to be into the spotlight, to have your suffering out there and seen by the people. And if they tell us that media coverage doesn't change anything, then how exactly is the media coverage of the fact that they've been denied the organizing of these sporting events going to change anything? Please, thank you, and do not agree with sanctioning these people.
Thank you, Thomas. For the last speech on behalf of the side.
We have to judge the possible backward to us. Are going to because they are not going to how people have died after we organized the Olympics in Brazil, and we believe that this is unreasonable, and we have proved you that this is unreasonable. But more of that, even if we would have had abuses, the media coverage that such a sporting competition games will further drop those abuses and will blame the state on doing that, and those abuses are going to stop. So at the end of the day, we can see how there is no actual backlash of the fact that that country is going to host that event. But more of that, about the money, we believe that, one, we have told you that that country is not the only one to invest in that competition, but more of that, that country will further have a cash flow in order to use and solve the problem of those people out there. Okay, the second question, how do we actually put pressure on the state? And I want to highlight a contradiction in the case of the team government today, because they've explained a little bit on their third speaker that these people, they don't care about starving anymore. They care about hosting the Olympics. So if the state won't host the Olympic, and there will be such a measure imposed on them, there will be such a sanction imposed on them, the fact that they don't organize the Olympics, then they will put pressure on the state. We don't see how this is happening. They haven't explained to us, but this is also in a big contradiction with the fact that they are prioritizing actually the fact that they need money. They don't need to organize the Olympics. They need money. That's all. Okay. And at the end of the day, we see that we actually put pressure on the state, and we rather win this point because media coverage is the one that puts pressure on the state internationally and gives more voice to the people in that country. And we believe that if we have proven this, we have proven to you that we are going to put pressure on that state, because media coverage is happening every day, but not such a big media coverage, because we are talking about a massive one in the moment in which you are getting the first page of BBC, the first page of CNN, and you are gaining the most media coverage from that period of time. And third of all, do we have any benefits? Ladies and gentlemen, investors and tourists are coming into corrupt countries as well, but they have to know the fact that those countries have beautiful places to explore, such as Greece. Greece is a corrupt country, but Greece also has lots of investors and lots of tourists. Lots of tourists that go and further invest further develop their cash flow on the market. And talking about cash flow, let's talk about my last point in this question about jobs. We believe that one, we are offering jobs in the short term because you need a year to build up a stadium and to build up and to prepare all that event. We believe that in that moment, it is a benefit. If there is no deterrent, we should offer them this benefit of short-term jobs. And even if we want to do sustainable ones, some of them are going to keep being there because we are talking about creating new shops. We are talking about creating new jobs that are going to continue. Yes, the stadium will be already built, but I don't know, McDonald's will keep existing in that place even after the Olympics are over. For all these reasons, we beg for your support.
Thank you, Andrea. And now, for the last speech of this debate, we give the floor to Alexander.
The international community should say, Brazil, you're not allowed to use your fancy stadium unless you feed the 2 children starving by your stadium. This is what we think would be natural and safe from the international community. But on the other hand, we have a team opposition, which would actually like to picture the 2 starving children whose parents probably worked to death to building that stadium. We are saying that this is a sacrifice which is not worth making, which brings no benefit on the long term, but only on the short term. But about this whole idea and delusion of short term in my 3 points of this reply. But before moving to all that, 4 major strategic mistakes. Firstly, the whole idea of media coverage. Because what we heard, and they tried to make it not seem like a contradiction, is that, investors see these people which are being abused and abusing human rights, and they're seeing a possibility. They're seeing a river to pour money from. But then they say, investors will help the economy. Mr. Speaker, let's be serious. On their portrait, the only investors that would come to these countries are people making a sweatshop to pay these people 50 cents per day, and we don't see this as something good, even if they apparently do. Because we would like to suppose ourselves to the standards of the United Nations, to support ourselves to the standards of the Declaration of the Human Rights, and we would definitely not like to attract further abuse and further sweatshops to people who have known nothing before that. But apparently that's fine. Second strategic mistake. They allocated sort of 3 minutes in all their speeches accusing us of, not bringing any harms. But unfortunately for them, the first thing that they started to ignore from our case is the 5-minute analysis that Theo came with, in which he told you, firstly, that these stadiums are actually made basically from the money paid through taxes by these people. This is a misallocation of the funds. Second thing that they ignored completely in all their 3 constructive speeches is my 4-minute constructive in my second speech, in which I told you that the government has a specific duty to fulfill the primary needs of its citizens, and the primary need is not a stadium, and the primary need is not a 2-week-long job to which you're going to be paid far less than you deserve and to which might probably kill you. But the primary need is to spend that money correctly. But what they said is that, in our world, and this is the third accusation that they made wrongly, is that in our world we are changing nothing. And again, another chunk of analysis that they completely ignored. Because starting from Teodor's speech, we brought you the analysis about pressure because we have two actors that are going to be affected. Firstly, we're going to have the upper class of these countries, the upper class in China, which has decisional and economical power in the country. This class would want the Olympics back and would put pressure on to China. How these countries vote. And last, the whole idea of, media coverage. 3 points to that. We heard about investors. I already dealt with that, telling you it's superficial, it's shallow, and even if investors would be attracted, these are not the investors that we want to have in this country, because they're worse than nothing. Secondly, the whole idea of NGOs. Mr. Speaker, this is not inherent to the motion, because what they're saying is create a disaster because it attracts attention. It's like saying let's crush a car on the streets of Romania to attract attention that the Romanian streets are horrible. No, this is not how things work. And we're saying that we should treat reality the way it is, that NGOs make their duty without you calling desperately for them and creating more harm. So for we're caring about the people on the long term. Secondly, because we're saying that this is disastrous to the economy of the countries. And lastly, because we don't want to create greater harm to this proposed.